Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Hawksworth, and I have the good fortune to serve on the board of directors at the Athenaeum. So on behalf of all the folks at the Athenaeum and the wonderful people who have organized Refocus, celebrating 50 years of feminist art in Philadelphia, I want to welcome you to this great discussion tonight of feminist film theory, the male gaze at 50. And before we start, could I take 1 minute to ask you to turn off your cell phones so that we won't have to deal with interruptions? And then I would also ask one of the co-sponsors of this program, Marcia Moss from Refocus, to come up and say a word about the exciting programs that they've been organizing this spring.
I won't go that far.
Marcia, come to the mic.
Hi there. I am so pleased, along with Diane Burko, co-organizers, and Judy Brodsky, and you said you know Judy, that the Athenaeum and Kathleen Carlin are participating in Refocus. And Refocus is a collaboration of close to 70 organizations, arts organizations in Philadelphia, universities and colleges and alternative spaces, commercial galleries, all collaborating on presenting presentations, exhibitions, panels about art, women in art, and women with a feminist perspective. So I'm so glad you're all here.
It's one of the wonderful things about the Athenaeum that they partner with all kinds of organizations across the city for musical performances, for wonderful intellectual exchanges. So we're all happy that you are here. Some of you look like you're old enough to remember when the concept of the male gaze first was introduced in the early 1970s. And we had been raised in a world that told us that perception was neutral, objective. Your brain just recorded what was in the outside world. And then all of a sudden, John Berger says, an English art historian, no, when you look at the world, you may be actually seeing male desire. And then about a year later, Laura Mulvey comes on the scene and says, whoa, it's not just ways of seeing, it's forms of pleasure. And these two theorists introduced this notion of the male gaze that has been totally transformative of how we understand what we see in the world and how it affects our own beings. So to help us understand this amazing concept and how it has transformed visual experience around the world, we are so lucky tonight to have Dr. Kathleen Rowe Carlin with us. She is the founder and founding director of the Film Studies, Cinema Studies program at the University of Oregon. She graduated summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Connecticut, got an MA from Johns Hopkins, did a PhD at University of Oregon. She's an award-winning scholar and teacher. Her work, her research has broken new ground on unruly girls and unrepentant mothers, can you imagine? And she has developed an entire repertoire of courses that those of us my age could only drool over. Courses on the history of motion pictures, courses on women directors, courses on the depiction of girls in popular culture, indigenous portrayals in film, race, and the musical, just an entire world of aesthetics and the media from a feminist perspective. So we are so lucky tonight. Will you join me in welcoming Dr. Kathleen Carlin?
What an introduction. Thank you so much, Mary.
Yeah, it's, you understand exactly where I'm going in this talk, and it's... I typically, when I talk, I don't like to have something between me and the audience, so I'm going to probably keep drifting away from that microphone, but I'll try to stay here. I'm so delighted to be here, so happy to see all of you here. I want to thank Marcia for inviting me. When Marcia, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but when Marcia invited me, I thought, film and the fine arts, I wonder what we have in common, what I could talk about that would be the sort of things that I'm interested in, I think about. I wonder if those are the same things that people in the fine arts think about. And it didn't take me long to figure out, yes, we have a lot in common. Before I get into exactly a little bit more formal part of what I'm going to say, the first part of this talk, I'm going to take us through this 50 years of feminist film theory. It'll be kind of theoretical, and lay out this business of the male gaze, and then the a parallel history of what was happening in feminism from the second wave that many of us were a part of, we remember, to the third wave, which happened in the 90s, to the present, where we are in what some people would say the fourth or possibly the fifth wave. So the first part, I'll trace a parallel history of feminism, theoretical at the beginning, and then I'll talk about its application to, I wanted to do 3 blockbuster movies about the female gaze at the end, but I think time will not allow me to do all 3. So I'll probably focus on 2 movies at the end. I should also say some of this material you will know, many of you may know this already, but I think there's some benefit in refreshing our minds about this theory and just kind of revisiting it and thinking more about it. And also, I'll say I've always been interested in the popular, and especially in texts that push buttons, that are polarizing, that cause people to either love them or hate them. And my research has always kind of gravitated to those kinds of film texts and television texts, and I still am interested in provocative texts like the movies I'll talk about at the end of this talk, Wonder Woman, The Woman King, and then Barbie, that elicit very, very strong responses, positive and negative. Okay, so now to my more formal part of my, and Hollywood, the other framework. I'm talking about Hollywood today, and of course there are other film traditions where women had, were state-supported cinemas. Women had much more opportunity to put the female gaze out there. But for better or worse, however you view it, Hollywood is the global dream machine. It hits, Bollywood is a bigger cinema. It reaches more people. But Hollywood is, from the beginning, for many, many reasons, it is the dominant thing when you think movies. The first thing we think about is Hollywood. And it's a boys' club. It always has been. Actually, it was better in the beginning than it is now. And therefore, these things kind of come together in this analysis I'm going to be making of the male gaze. So film is art. So some of the things, art, feminism, history. Is film an art? Especially popular film. Should we be talking about Barbie as art? It's art. It's very new cinema in the history of the visual arts, dating from around the turn of the 20th century. It rapidly became an entertainment sensation, but could an industrially and collectively produced medium with a commercial intent be considered art? In 1915, D.W. Griffith showed Birth of a Nation at the White House. He insisted that it was. Woodrow Wilson showed it in the White House, described it as writing history with lightning, and Griffith was saying, yes, film is art. It was a giant production, but so from the beginning, people were trying to insist that it was art, but some of that history is, with film, as with everything else, is entangled in all kinds of things. It wasn't until the 60s in France that a group of young filmmakers and critics loved Hollywood. And they insisted, yes, film is art. the definition of art is that it has a single creative consciousness behind it. And in the studio system, there was a driving force behind these films, like Hitchcock and John Ford, and that was the director. So once these guys invented what they called the auteur theory in the 60s, suddenly intellectuals say, voila, film is art. So we can think about film as art. Second, the male gaze, and Mary already set this up so nicely. 50 years ago, the common ground we have, film is comprised of many other things besides the image. There's photography, there's performance, there is sound, which I think is often undervalued in film. But the thing that everybody keeps coming back to is its visuality, it's the image. When you're talking film, you're talking the image, and that we have in common with painting and with sculpture. The male gaze, which originated actually in art history, the first naming of that with John Berger, taken up in film studies, but it has a deep relevance, both in terms of how we internalize it and in how it persists in the institutions, the gatekeepers that decide what gets put in museums, what gets included in literary canons, what gets recognized in things like the Academy Awards. So the male gaze, we're moving into the territory of the female gaze, and I'll talk about that. But I think the gaze is a really interesting, both as a literal concept, how it's orchestrated within cinema, but metaphorically, how it exists in institutions and how we continue to internalize it within ourselves. Okay, gender. Should we even be talking about gender anymore? Because, male gaze, female gaze, male, female, the whole binary is being challenged. And maybe we shouldn't even be talking about a gendered gaze. Well, I'm going to say, yeah, in theory, possibly, but gender persists in the real world, at least in institutions. So there is value in continuing to name something like the male gaze. Okay, so I'm going to begin, as I said, with Mulvey, and I'll begin. We've come a long way in understanding how the male gaze represents us to representing ourselves in the female gaze. The popular culture is always multivalent. That's why it's popular. It can mean many things to many people. And it's often controversial, but it reaches wide audiences. And it can be a potent means of depicting the feminist struggle through the female gaze and moving us toward its goals. And this is the argument I'm going to make today, that in these giant blockbuster movies, because they are popular and because they reach such wide audiences, the potential is there to take on not only a female gaze, but a feminist gaze, and reach audiences and continue the struggle of feminism. Okay. There were many debates, many debates in early film theory about what is the meaning of film, how do we understand it. The early one, there was, whether you were on the left or the right, the liberal humanists or neo-Marxists, people were very concerned about the power of film to manipulate the masses. It was a potent medium of communication, and there was a lot of anxiety. Early in the history of film theory, most of the concern was class. It wasn't until the second wave that people started to think about gender and what film has to do with gender. So I'm going to begin. The first one here is, as Mary mentioned, John Berger, the British art historian who did for art history what Leonard Bernstein did for classical music. He went to the democratizing medium of television and gave a series of lectures that reached wide audiences and identified this key argument that seeing establishes our place in the world. I've already told you this is what I'm going to do, so I'm a little bit ahead of myself here, or behind myself. Here is his famous book, Ways of Seeing. And his argument here is that seeing establishes our place in the world. Men act, women appear. Men look at women. Women watch ourselves being looked at. This determines not only most relations between men and women, but the relationship of women to ourselves. And I think these quotes, I quote him at length, but they're so powerful and they're so resonant, it's worth thinking about them. The surveyor of woman in herself is male. Thus, she turns herself into an object, and most particularly, an object of vision, a sight. This explosive theory, and at the same time, 50 years ago, my goodness, when Marcia asked me to give this talk, and I thought 50 years of refocus, what was going on in film studies? The same stuff. 50 years ago, we have Laura Mulvey showing up on the scene with like a year before, a year after John Berger. Refocus was happening here in New York, an organization in 1973 called Women Make Movies, which was the first organization collecting work by women artists working in film at the time. It was a distribution center, the only one in the country, mostly small works. I went to them when I was doing my own research, and they sent me work. It was very hard at the time, before the internet, before YouTube. You couldn't get your hands on a lot of this experimental and avant-garde work. Women Make Movies, 1973 in New York, still going strong. 50 years ago, what a moment to celebrate, right? So in Laura Mulvey, in her work, she did take up what John Berger did, but she added that extra component of desire. Not only how the world, as John Berger said, you know, perspective, it was the invention of perspective that started to place men at the center of the universe in the art world. Perspective puts all of the gaze into the one person in the center of the visual field. And beginning in the Renaissance, men would start to do business together with men, surrounding themselves with paintings of women that reminded them that they were not women, that they were men, they were the center of everything. And Berger, in this brilliant analysis, links that to the discovery of perspective in the Renaissance. As he explained, it continues into advertising today. And it does, this visual ordering of the world centered on the male gaze. So for Laura Mulvey, she said, what is the source of the pleasure of cinema? Why do we enjoy it? Well, she was a psychoanalyst, or I say she was interested in psychoanalysis. And she said the pleasure is scopophilia, a kind of drive to enjoy looking. So she takes this notion of multiple gazes, the male director behind the camera, that's the first gaze. He trains his camera on what he wants to see, male characters on the screen, and there's a relay of glances on the screen of men who look at each other. And then the third one is the male spectator in the audience watching the screen. And in the ideal space of cinema, you're in a dark room, there's a giant screen. It's an immersive experience that fosters the pleasures of voyeurism, watching without being seen. So what are they watching? Women. The objectified woman, who is there because she has that quality of to be looked at-ness. And that it became a term, to be looked at-ness. So this is Mulvey, and I'm going to show you a couple of clips here to kind of illustrate this. One is from the classic, wonderful film Vertigo. And it's when Scotty lays eyes for the first time on Maddie. So let me get this thing started. And I hope you can watch both the power. Imagine Hitchcock filming, the male protagonist acts. Women don't do much in Hollywood. I mean, in the classical film, we're there to be one, to be looked at and one, and the action happens around the male. The desire happens around the male. So let's take a look at this. Is there any way to lower the lights just a little bit? And get us a little, our audio? I guess it's coming. It's so lush and so beautiful and so creepy. I love comedy, and most of my work is on comedy, so I'm going to show us a little piece of comedy here from Some Like It Hot, which spoofs this, and I'll probably clip this a little long, so I may, this is, you all I'm sure know this movie, but it spoofs the male gaze. I don't know, it's kind of fun to watch, so we'll take a look at Marilyn Monroe, Jack Lemmon, and Tony Curtis dressed as women in a
Florida Limited leaving on track 1 for Washington, Charleston, Savannah, Jacksonville, and Miami. All aboard, all aboard.
What's the matter now?
How do they walk in these things, huh? How do they keep their balance?
Must be the way the weight is distributed. Now, come on.
It is so drafty. They must be catching cold all the time, huh?
Will you quit stalling? We're gonna miss the train.
I feel naked. I feel like everybody's staring at me.
With those legs, are you crazy? Now, come on. Uh-oh.
It's no use. We're not going to get away with it, Joe.
My name is Josephine, and this was your idea in the first place.
Look at that. Look how she moves. That's just like Jell-O on springs. Must have some sort of built-in motor or something.
we've seen enough of
I
that.
tell you, it's a whole different sex.
You get the
What are you
idea.
afraid of? Nobody's asking you to have a baby. This is just to get us out of town. Once we get to Florida, we'll blow this whole set up.
Yeah,
So-
this goes on and on, but we'll, so there you have it. That's two versions of the male gaze. So almost immediately after, for Mulvey, the only way to get rid of this oppression of the male gaze was the radical annihilation of pleasure. So she wanted a feminist avant-garde that was not about pleasure, that was really about ideas, about politics, and you can imagine how successful that was. Not very. So there was a lot of pushback to her theory, very immense. It exploded on the scene, the male gaze, and it remains the most cited, the most reprinted, the most taught, the most quoted piece of feminist film theory, I believe, that's ever been written to this day. But there was a lot of pushback, and feminists were always interested in reception and the notion, because as women, we're not often allowed to produce media. We watch it, we receive it. So how do we enjoy it? Why do we enjoy watching things like this? And I do, I'm sure all of you do. Why do we enjoy it? So one answer is, I'm going to, why do we love works by Fellini, by Truffaut, Scorsese, Spike Lee? All the great filmmakers in the film canon are men, and we enjoy them. Well, I do have a little thing I'm going to share with you, and then I'll give some of the answers. The Bechdel test. This is the situation, and how many of you have heard of this, maybe? Yeah, okay, so I'll quickly go through this. How you ask, how many movies have two women that talk to each other about something other than a man? And just for a minute, think of your favorite movie. Ask yourself about it. Here are some of the movies that flunk that test. Interesting, right? Yep. It's so this is the situation. How do we live with this? Look at all those, ending with Oppenheimer. So how do we deal with this? So for Mulvey, still being in psychoanalysis, she says, well, women have the ability to oscillate our viewing position. And because we all began male and female early in our lives, to be a woman, you repress the masculine. But when we go to the movies, we can reactivate that masculine side of ourselves and then take that position, enjoy the movie. She calls it kind of a transvestite oscillation. We become a man for a while, enjoy the movie, then we can switch back and become a woman. Kind of interesting. That's how she viewed it through the psychoanalytic position. Another avenue was not interested in psychoanalysis, but came from Britain, which is British cultural studies. And that was a less deterministic view, and it said an artistic text, is really a site where meaning is struggled over. It's not fixed, and it's encoded in by the artist, but viewers decode it according to what they want. So meaning is a more dynamic interplay of what the artist put in and what the viewer puts out. And this was a very important way of analyzing how not only women, but members of other minoritized cultures participate in the mainstream. That ability to connect with something and create your own meaning from it. So I'm going to just make a little reminder of my work. I was interested in unruly women and comedy. Melodrama had always been very popular for feminist scholarship. It was the genre because it addresses women. It has women in it. It deals with women's lives, but typically in the form of suffering, death, and tragedy. I thought, there's another way to get at this. Maybe turn the tables on the gaze. What happens if we look back? What if we exploit the power of being seen instead of viewing it as objectifying, but saying, look at me. Well, there's Roseanne, who she's not hesitating with being looked. She takes the power of being seen, throws that gaze right back. And comedy too. So this was my own, but I went back to classical Hollywood, Katharine Hepburn. I had Cary Grant behind bars, how about that? And then Barbara Stanwyck and The Lady Eve. Also, these are films by male directors, but the comedy is always very sympathetic to strong, interesting women, and that's why I did my work on it. The next version of this, I'm going to jump ahead, is to a friend and person I have immense respect for, Jacqueline Bobo. We were in graduate school together, and while I was doing my research, she was taking this notion of the dynamic text and applying it to what was going on in her community of black women. So The Color Purple comes out, the Spielberg movie. Film people hate Spielberg. He's too pedestrian, he's too popular. They hate him. So everybody thought this was a travesty. Spielberg makes a movie out of Alice Walker's wonderful novel. Oh, how horrible can this be? Well, guess what? All of my friend Jackie's friends, the black women, were adoring this movie. They were loving it. So she said, so she went in and did an ethnographic study of why they loved it. And I'm going to come back to this image at the end, where when we're talking about the female gaze, here are two women looking at each other. And I'm going to come back to that at the very end, but I didn't even realize that resonance. But for Jacqueline Bobo in The Color Purple, she said that ability to decode this text according to their own desire was what was driving their pleasure in this text. Seeing a black woman on the big screen, which so rarely happened in anything except the most demeaning ways. This was so joyful for these audiences. And I love this expression, I'm here. An assertion of presence that was a powerful example of reading against the grain of a mainstream text, racist. They could decode, they could see past the racism, acknowledge it was there, but say, I see other things. I'm making my own meaning out of that. Okay, so now we're going to jump ahead. 80s, Reagan years, feminism in retreat, all the other liberation movements also in retreat. So that was a quiet year. But then post-feminism showed up, and if you've heard that, that's kind of the idea, we don't need feminism anymore, it's already been done, let's move on, let's get on with it, post-feminism. It's not a feminist theory, it's a condition that kind of appropriates that word feminism, but it is not about feminism. So what happens then is girls, And I have 3 daughters, and I taught, one of whom is here, and I taught a lot of young women. And one of the things that my generation said, why are these young women not interested in feminism? It's really annoying. What are we going to do about it? Well, so at this moment, we suddenly had this explosion of the guerrilla girls in the art world, right? Riot girls in punk rock. Spice Girls in popular music. Girls, girls, girls. Why are they even calling themselves girls? We don't do that. You know, my generation, not to be done. But these girls were reclaiming this term of girls. So this notion of this movement of girl power set the stage for the third wave of feminism. And I'm going to show you some images here. Titanic. It's so important. Teen girl audiences kept that movie afloat. It's a terrible pun, I'm sorry, but I can't resist it. I mean, it was a not extremely expensive movie that would have tanked if it weren't for all the hordes of girls going to see this movie. This looks like a retrograde image, romantic love, right? You know, we in the second wave were supposed to be done with that. But this new generation of girls was rethinking a lot of the views of my generation. They viewed the second wave as puritanical, as out of touch with the contemporary world, feminism riddled with its own hierarchies of class and race. They were not very much attracted to the feminism of my generation, so they invented their own. Here's a couple more. Legally Blonde, pink became okay. They invented their own with, and Clueless should be up here as well. And then a movie, Scream. And this, I don't know whether many of you know if this is a slasher movie. This was huge. My students were all watching it. Their mothers were horrified. It was about, there were giant battles about this movie, but this was the movie that the girls loved because they were taking charge. They were fighting back. And what she's saying here in this image that I stole, she's saying, not in my movie, you know, this making fun of the tropes of the horror in slasher movies where the killer's supposed to come up. Again, you think he's dead, he comes up, and then he goes and does all kinds of horrible stuff. But she says, not in my movie, and she takes him out. So there's both an awareness of popular culture and a centering of female desire, a new feminism. So here is, as I say, the notion of this new third wave of feminism, and it's important to understand this because this is the backdrop to the movies I'm going to talk about very shortly. Second wave, done. There were problems with it. Popular culture is the politics of the new century. This is where it is happening for this generation. In popular culture, in movies like those. They reclaimed aspects of femininity that my generation rejected. And they pushed hard for a more intersectional feminism, which is where we are today. Not more knowing embrace of difference, different sexualities, races, ethnicities, and so on. So I'm going to start moving a little bit faster here. Now we're going to leap ahead to where this background, I say, is so important for the generation of women auteurs who finally started to break into the mainstream. The 3 movies that I would love to have time to talk a lot about, but I won't, all of them were, they were interested in, they all started in realism. Their first movies were small movies in the genre of realism, and I'll show you some images from that. But they found realism too constricting because it always comes to a bad end for women, or it typically does. So if you want a more utopian vision of the possibility of what a woman can be or what the world could be, let's look into these more genres of fantasy where there's more room for the imagination. And one thing I love about the image is it's the root of imagination. When we think of the verbal, linguistic root of imagination is the image. So popular new genres like fantasy, like action film for women, like superhero films. We can imagine things there that you can't in realism. They started attracting the gaze of massive audiences of women. These movies, these big blockbuster movies,
provoking controversy, including among women and feminists, but especially provoking the institutional male gaze. So moving along quite a bit faster. This is by Patty Jenkins. In her first, she was the director of Wonder Woman, and I've already, probably some of you have heard me talk about Wonder Woman before, so I'm going to go very quickly through this Wonder Woman business, and I have an article that I will tell you about if you want to read more about it, where I talk about Wonder Woman in the context of Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama and other women that were, what happens in the culture when a woman asserts the fact that she has power. What do we do to these powerful women? How do we represent them? The first movie that Patty Jenkins made was based on Eileen Wuornos, a real person, serial killer. This, Charlize Theron won an Academy Award, I believe, for this. This was a very well-received movie, but it took Jenkins almost 20 years before she got money to make her next movie. So the next movie, this is what she said, and I do love this quote, so I'm going to read this to you. She said, "After that, I wanted to tell a story about a hero who believes in love, who is filled with love, who believes in change and the betterment of mankind." So who did she choose? She went to an icon of feminist power, which is Wonder Woman. And here on the first cover of Ms. Magazine, Wonder Woman believes in love. How about that? 45 years later, she's still there, okay? And I'm going to show you this clip. We're running out, going so fast. I'm going to show you the clip. The audience, the thing that's so important about this movie is women felt with this the way the black women felt at The Color Purple. They said, Jill Lepore, Harvard historian, who's written a book about Wonder Woman, she said, and I'm going to just paraphrase her, "I'm not proud of the fact that I went to a movie and saw this woman with a golden tiara and thigh-high boots slaughtering hordes of terrible men, but I did, and I liked it." And so she kind of captures some of the pleasure that women felt in seeing this fantasy enactment of power that women are denied. She's after days of punching cards, seeing women disrespected, just going through the routine of our daily lives, to go to the theater and see this. When I saw this movie, and I was not alone, the theaters were packed. Women were grabbing the hands of strangers sitting next to them at this moment. So let's take a look at this great moment, because it is just, this is the moment I think that brought women to tears and to cheers.
No man's land, Diana. It means no man can cross it, all right? This
No man's
battalion
land.
has been here for nearly a year, and they barely gained an inch. All right, because on the other side, there are a bunch of Germans pointing machine guns at every square inch of this place. This is not something you can cross. It's not possible.
So what? So we do nothing?
No, we are doing something. We are. We can't save everyone in this war. This is not what we came here to do.
No. But it's what I'm going to do.
Diana! What the bloody hell is he playing at? Engage! Fire! She's taking all the fire. Let's go! 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 Down! Strike there! Strike there!
Yes. As many people said, God, I didn't know I craved this so much, but I do. You know, it's giving us something we've craved, we haven't seen, and we love. Fantasy, but tapping into some real desire, right? And there's a clip of her, the female gaze at her love object, where she turns the camera on Chris Pine. That's a very sexy scene, but it's not objectifying. And the word I've used that I'm going to come back to again, I'm going to move quite quickly now. This female gaze, especially in love, it's an intimate gaze, it's a relational gaze, it's not an objectifying gaze. Okay, moving along. Not everybody liked this movie. Many women didn't like it. And then James Cameron of the who did Terminator and Titanic, he said, that's not a good feminist hero. This is a good feminist hero. This is my version of a good feminist hero. You know, whatever. I mean, the question it raises, this is Linda, who is she in the Terminator? You know, he thinks she's fights, she's tough, this is a man's idea of a feminist hero. And I stand back and say, who decides what a feminist hero should be? Should it be some big famous male director, or should it be the women in the audiences who are cheering for something? So once again, there's a little institutional male gaze happening here. Okay, I do have an article on this if you want, with profusely illustrated online, available online through the journal Jump Cut. I'd be happy to share it with you. I'm going to move ahead now to The Woman King, and this is also another by a director, a woman who was a Temple student. A year, and again, I'm going to go. She also began in the genre of realism with a beautiful movie called Love and Basketball. And then when she got the opportunity had a budget to make a big movie, she decided to do a very feminist thing, which is to reclaim history. And as we all know, history is written by the winners, and it is always a subject of debate as continuing fighting over the 1619 project in schools. We are arguing and fighting still over who has the power to tell history, whose history gets told. So Chukwu, the director of The Woman King, all cast entirely people of color. Department heads, headlined by Viola Davis, a magnificent performance by her. Everybody, either a woman or a woman of color. Terrence Blanchard, fantastic composer, did the score. He did the opera, The Fire in My Bones at the Metropolitan. Beautiful movie, and reclaiming a history unknown in a country many people have not even heard of. Reclaiming history, a very, very feminist move. So what happens? First of all, a whole lot of criticism because it wasn't accurate. This is not historically accurate. Well, this is an entertainment film. And the question of, was Gladiator accurate? Was 12 Years a Slave accurate? Was Braveheart accurate? There's any number of films of historical figures directed by men. Nobody asks, how accurate are they? They did about this one. So this was the first part of controversy. And the second one that, as I say, huge enthusiasm, as with The Color Purple, among black women globally, from LA to Queens to West Africa. Love letter to our ancestors and to black women of all generations. But the biggest travesty to me, and the biggest evidence that the institutional gaze is not only male, but it's a white male gaze. Nobody believes that the Academy Awards are about artistic excellence. You know, if you love films, you know that that's not the case. But the Academy Awards are a measure of the zeitgeist and the cultural values of the time. So what we saw in this year with 3 highly acclaimed movies directed by black women, Till, and I've got the names up there, San Omer, The Woman King, by black women directors, not a single nomination for anything among all of those films. And there is, so what can you say? Prince-Blythewood, the director of this film, said, this is not a snub. A snub is a casual disregard, disrespect. This is evidence of systemic racism. So we still need to think about that male gaze because it's still there. Okay, I'm going to leap ahead. I have a scene here from that I hope to show you, but I'm going to jump ahead now to Barbie as my final film. Barbie, biggest movie, biggest box office of the year. Created, and again, Barbie is moving. I am going to make the case that this is a feminist movie for the reasons that I'm going to lay out for you. Barbie the doll, like popular culture, is powerful, multivalent, and girls actively code that doll. They knock off her head. They have weird Barbie. They have this Barbie. They have that Barbie. So they play very actively with this doll. In the fourth wave, as with the Woman King, we see this more intersectional feminism. Barbie represents a fifth feminist wave of feminism, which is very interested in men. And as men explore masculinity, new kinds of masculinity. How many of you have seen Barbie? Maybe, yeah. You can see Ken learns in the course of this movie that he's Ken-uff. So like all of these movies, we have Greta Gerwig harnessing the spectacle of cinema and the pleasure of comedy to critique the male gaze. We see here in this movie, and it's in many things, we know the doll was created by a woman. It's also feminist history. The movie is a story of the history of feminism for the masses. And we go through the second wave. We have a very vivid demonstration of all of these very vivid demonstration of the male gaze brought to life in this movie. And all of these things, he uses comedy, uses film, very knowing about film history and very knowing about feminist history. So it demonstrates the male gaze, and it critiques stereotypical tall, white, skinny, blonde Barbie. She's not taken for granted, she's critiqued in this movie. So there is one movie I'm going to mention in passing that many of you have also seen, and I'm going to throw this out as a little provocation, and that's Poor Things. The other movie about a doll. This doll, of course, is made by a man. The movie is directed by a man. The whole creative team is male. So let's look at Barbie's hero's journey. What happens to Barbie? At the end of that movie, Barbie chooses life, which means choosing death. It's like Adam and Eve. She's exiled from the Garden of Barbie Land into the real world because she wants to be a maker, not the thing made. She wants to be a creator, not the idea created. So she makes that choice. Poor Things. And let me read you a quote here. There's a wonderful roundtable in The Guardian. This is another one of these very polarizing movies. Is it feminist or another male fantasy? She's bound and gagged for laughs. A beautiful adult female with a child brain and tendencies towards nymphomania. Is this the female gaze or the gaze of an all-male production team? Think about it. Think about these two movies. And I'm just throwing that out as a question. Guess which movie got more love, critical love? I don't need to answer that one for you. I Come Down Hard is Barbie bringing feminism to massively wide audiences in a very utopian sort of way. So I'm going to close here with the very famous clip, the very famous monologue that America Ferrera, whom I think is wonderful, her first movie, Real Women Have Curves, beautiful movie. She makes this movie at this monologue at the end, making the case for why we need feminism. What for Barbie, if you're going to come into, if you're feeling stressed and in pain in the real world, guess what? That's what women feel. This is the condition of being a woman. So let me, and here again, this is the female gaze. I'm going to play you this. This has made the rounds. It's very popular, and then I will wrap things up. America Ferrera talking to Barbie in the real world, deciding that she wants to.
It is literally impossible to be a woman. You are so beautiful and so smart, and it kills me that you don't think you're good enough. Like, we have to always be extraordinary. But somehow we're always doing it wrong. Like, you have to be thin, but not too thin. And you can never say you want to be thin. You have to say you want to be healthy, but also you have to be thin. You have to have money, but you can't ask for money, because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the damn time. You have to be a career woman, but also always be looking out for other people. You have to answer for men's bad behavior, which is insane, but if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you threaten other women, because you're supposed to be a part of the sisterhood, but always stand out and always be grateful. But never forget that the system is rigged, so find a way to acknowledge that, but also always be grateful. You have to never get old, never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard, it's too contradictory, and nobody gives you a medal or says thank you. And it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault. I'm just so tired of watching myself and every single other woman tie herself into knots so that people will like us. And if all of that is also true for a doll, just representing a woman, then I don't even know.
Good place too. What more can you say? What more can you say? Yeah, a poignant, powerful expression of, reminder of what it's like still to be a woman. So in conclusion, here's this final slide I'm going to show you, and this is the end of Barbie. Here's the female gaze again. Intergenerational, this is Rhea Perlman playing Ruth Handler, the inventor of the Barbie doll, and Barbie ready to leave behind that fantasy of Barbie land and join the real world. Here is that female gaze, relational, intimate, women looking at each other, like we saw on the cover of Jackie Bobo's book, looking at each other, and the audiences looking. I hope this, I think this image in this movie, women looking at, and men, are, men, the Kens out there, the Knopfs, looking at that screen, informed, entertained, and I hope inspired to continue the struggle of feminists to build a world where what America Ferrera expressed no longer happens. So thank you so much for joining me on this spin.
So we have a minute or two for questions.
Oh, no.
And if anybody asks a question, you could repeat it.
Okay, I am sorry that I tried very hard. I said I did. We're not supposed to talk about, we don't talk about bodies in in any critical way in my family, but I tried to put this paper on a diet and it didn't work very well. I put it on a Word diet. I tried to trim it down, but as you can probably tell, this is material I care a whole lot about and I have a lot of things to say. So please, I'd be happy to hear any questions, and I think we'll close up this, but I think there's some refreshments and I'd be happy to answer questions. Yes?
I have a question and a comment. First of all, thank you so much. It's so invigorating for you to talk.
Thank you.
I saw Barbie in a small movie theater in Vermont, and it was a community experience.
Yeah,
I didn't think it was when I went in the audience, but people cheered. Anyway, it really was quite extraordinary, and it came across. It was an important point.
I'm so happy to hear, and I'm so happy to hear that comment about reiterating what I had said, that this was a communal event of bringing people together, and the movies can do this, but they often don't, but they usually don't, but bringing women together. And in a small theater in Vermont, you had that. I heard that from many, many women, of this kind of surge of emotion, and I saw it with Annie and Joe, I believe. We saw it together, and this kind of electric sense that also happened with the other two movies I mentioned. But I think Barbie, in the year of Oppenheimer, of course Oppenheimer won all those awards. That's no surprise at all. But I think in the end, the movie that kind of pushed us forward which is not to dismiss Oppenheimer, but the power, I guess my point here is the power of cinema. When you harness the spectacle of cinema in a female gaze, it can accomplish a lot of political good. Other comments? Yes?
I have a comment and a question. So I think I'm in the minority who did not like Barbie and did not find it to be a particularly feminist film. Like, we're still centering white, conventional kind of beauty standards. The American Ferrera character is in this kind of dead-end job and nothing happens to resolve that in any way. The breakout star is Ken. So for me, this movie didn't feel feminist. And I've talked to my friends a lot about this as much as they'll entertain me. And one of my friends said, that speech was so important. My husband saw it, and it was so important for him to see that. And I was kind of like, it's 2023, really? This was news. And so for me, when we call this feminist film, right now, that seems like such a sad conception of where we are. And I wonder if you can kind of go to the imagination of what you see as, what would be really feminist film, and maybe outside of individual examples.
And the question is that our questioner said she saw the film and didn't think it was a feminist film because, if I'm interpreting what you said, America Ferrera's speech is, we all know that, right? What's the big deal about the speech? So for you, this was not a feminist film. And I appreciate that. And that's one of the things reason I love popular culture, because it does push buttons and it is open to conflicting points of view. One of the good things is even talking about what would be a feminist film. So to provoke this kind of conversation is really part of what I think is highly beneficial in a film like this. What would be a feminist film? That's a great question. For me, this is, because I'm very interested in audiences and in the slipping away of this awareness of this history. My students don't know this history, so you know it, I know it, but this brings this history out there. And yes, it's about this stereotypical Barbie, but in my view, it kind of draws attention to the fact that this did not solve the problems, and that happens in the film. Stereotypical Barbie did not solve the problems. The world is still completely messed up. But yes, I think what would be a feminist film? Maybe it would be. I come down hard on the side of getting the message out there, and that's why I work very much on Hollywood. There are Saint-Omer, the Anatomy of the Fall, Europe, Latin America. There are much more sophisticated art, and I don't want to say artful because that's charged, but they're more complex, nuanced depictions of feminism. Definitely. That I would hold up. I adore the work of Antonia's Line, The Question of Silence. I've taught a lot of these smaller films that are much more clearly, The Question of Silence, a film I think is absolutely brilliant, Dutch filmmaker Marlene Gorris. You're not going to see that in the theaters, but it is powerfully, analytically feminist. And I don't know, maybe some of you can respond to this question, which I very much appreciate. It is. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Again, thank you. Well, I'll thank you again, but for all of you for being here.
We all want to thank you, Kathleen. This was absolutely wonderful. So please join me in thanking
Thank you. Thank you.
So if some of you have questions, Kathleen might be willing to just spend a few more minutes with you. But the Athenaeum likes to keep things on schedule. So thank you all for coming. We've been thrilled with the quality of the presentation and the exciting energy that you brought into the room. So thank you again. This was just great.